Okay.
You got it.
All right. I am having a conversation, and they're all fabulous with everybody that I talk to. But this is going to be really quite interesting. I'm speaking with bassoonist Scott Poole, Dr. Scott Poole, about your is it 2020 or 2021 in this order? Did you have off the top of your head?
it it actually came out in 2020. Yeah,
Okay,
it was,
that's
and it
good.
was. We can talk a little bit more about it in a little bit, but
Sure.
it was a very coincidental release that it came
Ah,
out. That I've got this album of all solo music, unaccompanied music, and I called it Alone, and it hits right in the middle of when the pandemic started. So it's,
yeah, that'll be
you know,
good. That
very,
we'll get there.
I did
Let me
not
just
plan this, so
but
yeah.
or did you? You know what I mean? How cosmic energies work. So we're talking about your MSR Classics CD 2020 release,
Yeah.
Alone, music for unaccompanied bassoon, and I'm a clarinetist. I wasn't a happy clarinetist. That's why I got into conducting. But we'll talk a little bit about. I have my own experience with bassoonists as a clarinetist, and I was always
Yes.
very envious of bassoonists. We'll talk about that. Let me just run by the repertoire because out there of the faculty members that are all in my subscription list and all the rest of it, you're everybody, you're looking for the definitive solo bassoon CD that you can pull out when you need to look for some repertoire or something. This is it, Alone. And again, that is interesting. I was going to ask you about that title. It could have been solo,
Yes.
but
Yes.
Alone, and which has its implications, good, bad, and otherwise. Okay, so again, you'll give us that anecdote when we do it. Here's the repertoire. You and I talked a little bit, but you sort of take us well, you actually kind of jump a bit, but you begin with this with a wonderful piece, Paul Guénin, I presume French, Carnival of Venice, a wonderful arrangement by Nahagawa for solo bassoon. But what I'm getting at is you say to everyone in the first track with this Paul Guénin or Genin piece, Carnival of Venice, you say, okay, here's a virtuoso piece for you. Watch me. Or
Mhm.
listen to me. It's a beauty. Then Vincent Persichetti, we spoke a little bit of amazing, fabulous American composer, Parable for solo bassoon. Alexandre Uzunov, I hope I'm getting close to pronunciation,
Correct.
Lawson
Correct.
for bassoon solo. And when I first saw that, of course, as everyone does, it's like Lawson, who? Fred Lawson, Jeff Lawson, what? So we'll talk about that. Antonio Lauro, and we'll do with some of these years. And again, Lauro for solo bassoon. Very interesting piece. We'll talk about it. Wilson Osborne, Rhapsody for solo bassoon. I think that in amongst bassoonists, some of this is, as I think you mentioned in your program, that's competition pieces, that kind of thing. In other words, bassoonists know of
Yes,
this.
yes, yes. A little bit of the standard repertoire for bassoon, and some items that are brand new for the instrument, and then there's a few that are a little older, but just kind of not as well known.
Yeah, and for example, George Pearl, very well-known
Yes,
American
yes.
composer, that particular piece, Three Inventions for Solo Bassoon, I'd never heard it before, but really, really interesting. Chris Arrow, we'll talk about, born in 1970.
Yes.
Blur, I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Blur for solo bassoon. That's your last grand finale piece, and it is really something. Okay, let's see. Let's make sure we all understand. I always do this after the fact, and then finally I'll shut up here in a minute. We'll get going, and you can chatter at me.
Sure.
Dr. Scott Poole and Scott Paul. ScottPooleBassoon.com. I'll put all that stuff up on performingartsreview.net on your page for the CD, how to buy this, all that good stuff. Um, Associate Professor of Music, Texas A&M University in Corpus Christi. Stop me if I've missed, if I'm behind this.
Sure, sure, sure. No, it's all
Um,
good.
and apparently you Academy Director of the Taos International Music Festival. Remind me to try and remember to ask you about that because we're talking
Sure.
Europe, no? Um,
Absolutely.
and a dangerous part of the world these days.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Which is part of the reason for the festival. We can talk about it
Ah,
in a little bit. Yeah.
okay. And your duties include music theory, oral skills, music appreciation, chamber music, just that whole gamut of chamber music, wind chamber music.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, at the risk of being a tiny, teeny bit corny, it is. How shall I say this? I mean, I live with all these instruments, but let's face it, bassoon is a big, huge, hard to wrap your hands around beast. And I'm imagining, as I mentioned to you off stage, you're going to tell us, or off camera, you're going to tell us when this all began, because I can't imagine like an 8-year-old having somebody throw this bassoon in their face and say, "Okay, kid, learn this, go."
That's absolutely correct. Here in Texas, we start bassoonists at about age, I guess, well, it's sixth grade, so that's about age 10 or
12,
11
11. Oh, okay.
or
Uh-huh.
so. And sometimes that's a little young, even. But in Europe, they have a tradition in some areas of a small bassoon, kind of a quarter
Ah,
size bassoon.
makes sense.
Um, and it's a lot easier to put your hands around, and so they get used to that. And then when they're big enough, they can move to the standard size instrument.
Yeah.
Much like the Suzuki
Fiddle.
instruments for violins. You've got the smaller sizes. But here in America, we don't really have that so much, and so bassoonists usually start at grade 6, 7, 8, something like that. But I was kind of a late bloomer in regards to that. When I was in junior high school, I wanted to play the instrument, but my band director said, "No, I want to put somebody else on bassoon. I'd like for you to stay on saxophone." So I was a saxophone player in junior high, and then I, fell in love with music and kind of did the whole thing that you hear about with professional musicians when they start. And I wanted to go to college and study music, and I was a jazz saxophonist, and I there was a school that I wanted to go to, had a great jazz program. And as I was talking to the recruiters, he said, "Well, you're a really good saxophonist, but we have a lot of good saxophonists." He said, "Have you ever thought about playing bassoon?" And I said, "Of course I have. I've been wanting to play this instrument for some time now." And so my senior year of high school is when I started the instrument. Um,
How lucky can you be to
yes,
have that opportunity come up? Because that's exactly my point, which is I'm a clarinetist. I'm a dime a dozen. I
yeah,
couldn't
yeah,
get, in my college days, I couldn't get work to save myself, in Los Angeles, because there were a
yeah,
million of us trying to get those, community orchestra gigs and that kind of. But all the bassoonists I knew were instantly employed. So that's how I
exactly.
feel about.
Well, and when I started my degree, my first degree, I still was considered myself kind of a saxophone player who played bassoon. But then around the middle of my degree, I got, I guess, smart. I don't know if it's smart of me or just understanding the world, where I was getting a whole lot more jobs on the bassoon than I was on saxophone. I was getting a fair amount on saxophone too, but I was really getting a lot of work on bassoon. And I could kind of see the writing on the wall, where as a jazz person, although I love the music and I love to play it, there were people that were playing and improvising at a much higher level than I was, and I was doing a lot better than some of my colleagues at the orchestral rep. I was playing bassoon in the orchestra while I was playing in the jazz bands too, and I kind of realized my strengths were on this other instrument. So I kind of flipped over, and about midway through my undergraduate degree, I went towards bassoon and made that my primary. And then I still play a little bit of saxophone here and
But
there. I
basically,
try not.
you never looked back. Okay,
I,
basically, you never looked back. So it
yeah,
confirms my theory. All those jealous years when I sat there with my clarinet and thought, "What?" As all my pals who were bassoonists got every gig that was coming up.
yeah,
Okay, so I'm
yeah,
happy
yeah.
about that. And my little anecdote, I've shared it reluctantly a couple of times, but I went to California Institute of the Arts, and I had been conducting since high school. So I mean, conducting was kind of the thing. It's easier anyway.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that. And clarinet was just not one of my favorite things, but I
Right.
played clarinet quite a lot. And I went to Cal Arts, and I've just forgotten his name. Richard Stoltzman
Ah, yes.
was there for a whole lot of great people were there for a couple of years in the beginning of Cal Arts, and then everybody had fights in the halls, and it was a crazy place. But anyway, so I went, and I was a clarinet major, also studying conducting. And the first classes, Richard Stoltzman said to us all that we were now going to learn how to make clarinet reeds. And that's when I said, no, I think I'll become, thank you, Richard. I think I'll become a conductor instead. Thanks very much. That's where I had to draw the line at that. Make it
Yeah.
work.
And even to this day, you don't find many clarinet players who actually make their reeds.
You,
Some do, but
point
it's
right.
a rarity. Whereas
So,
bassoon players, it's kind of
sure.
expected. Bassoon
Yeah,
and oboe, we always make our own reeds. So.
that's right. And you also smell of reeds. I'll
Oh
never
yeah.
forget all the oboe friends that I've known over the years, and they have this smell, this reed scraping. I'm joking a
Well,
little bit, yeah, but I'm sure you know what I mean.
I've always got some. I've ruined many a pair of pants with just having reed
Do
shavings all over my pants. That won't come out. So.
now let's talk about let's kind of finally move on a little bit to the CD, and I think I'm
Sure.
going to kind of almost by the back door come in because again we understand, all my people understand, most people understand and can visualize this instrument soon. So really, for the first, as I was listening to the CD for the first time, I was really, how is it or is it not hard to mic that instrument? Can you give me
It
any
is.
idea of what the studio is
It
like?
is. It is incredibly difficult to mic the instrument because the sound comes from so many areas of the instrument, and a lot of jobs that I'll play on, the sound engineers will come by and they'll just stick a instrument close to the bell, which there are only really two
It's
notes that come
crazy.
out
Yeah.
of the bell, and they're really loud when they do that. But most of the sound comes out of the side of the instrument, and so and in two different ways too. It's very difficult to mic, and one of the things that we sat down when we created the CD, we went through a variety of different mic placements, lots of test runs before we started actually laying things down, just to get the right sound. I thought that was a very important aspect of this album because I've heard so many uh, otherwise really good recordings, but the sound quality is just not that great. And
And it's and of course I think this may be my first solo bassoon CD. I've
sure.
spent some hours with, but what was because because I'm a musician as well, but that struck me immediately. And that's why I'm glad I asked the question, because in a way it's kind of dumb, because people would say, well, you stick a mic in front of the thing,
Yeah.
what's the problem? But I actually was trying to imagine how the difficulty from an engineering point of view of capturing, as you just described,
Yeah.
sounds are coming out of the instrument all over the place, if you will, and going in different directions, if you'll allow me the license. Uh,
Exactly.
so what did you end up with three microphones or something? What?
No, no, we used one giant microphone and put it in a really good hall in a great space because it wasn't a terribly reverberant hall, but it had just a little bit of give back, the reverberation to where it was a good sound, but that it wouldn't mess up the CD because sometimes when you go in to do some editing, um, the bleed over from the reverb can really be a problem.
Yeah.
So that's why a lot of people, will record in, soundproof chambers where, it's very, very dry. But in order to get the correct sound of the instrument, we went ahead and went into a hall. And I was so lucky. The recording engineer on this album, Paul Bissell, um, he was actually local here in Corpus Christi, and I had met him through a colleague when I talked about trying to find somebody to record this CD because I didn't know where I was going to go. I thought I might have to go up to San Antonio or Houston or somewhere, and one of my friends said, "Oh, we have a fabulous person right here in town. You should go meet him." And so we had a lot of talks about the sound concept and what do we want the instrument to sound like, and we tried two different rooms. We even started recording in one room, realized it wasn't the best room, so then we had to re-record everything. It was only a couple of tracks, but we had to re-record them in the better place. So yeah, it was a lot of trial and error with trying to capture the good sound.
And as I just am speaking for myself, I'm a musician. I'm not an acoustician.
Yeah,
I'm not a musicologist even, which is
right.
kind of a mercy too. I'm an intuitive kind of guy. But in terms of sound, and on CDs, because I've been reviewing a lot of CDs the
Mhm.
past 3 or 4 years, when I hear, and I say this probably too often, but when I hear just that clean, precise precise sound that, in the case of bassoon, is equal is not quite the word, but is the sound is gorgeous throughout the all of the reach, and I mean the reach of the instrument, let alone the reach of its registration and all the rest. And I noticed that right away. The sound is just it's just really it's a real bassoon sound. So
Oh,
congratulations.
thank you very much. Like I said, we worked a lot on that just to kind of figure out where to put things, and I think you did a great job. So I was real
Yeah,
happy with it.
really, really superb recording quality, engineering quality, which I think professional musicians, of course, we all appreciate that when you have a sound that you recognize instantly. And then, which we'll talk about later, then there's this quality of your own playing, which is mind-boggling, frankly. I mean, it's superb. I've the huge sound that you can put out of that instrument and so on. We'll get there. Okay. Um,
Sure.
let's see. Uh, well, we've discussed that. I guess that was kind of all that's kind of all I had in terms of the questions up front before moving right into the repertoire, because it is
Sure.
very interesting. Okay. So I guess we might as well just go to it, not to say maybe every single piece, but for example, what a very
Sure.
clever way of opening the CD with this bravura demo piece, if you will. The Janine, I hope I'm pronouncing properly. Everybody knows the Carnival of Venice, and this is with
Yes.
variations. Wonderful arrangement of with original variations. Have I got that right? By
Yes.
Kai Nakagawa, the
Correct.
arranger. Piece is just under 10 minutes. It has sweet little cadence. It's got all kinds of good stuff. That was deliberate, right? You wanted to say, hey, guess what? I played the bassoon.
Right. Right. Well, we knew that we wanted, putting this CD in order, the track order was quite a task, and we went through many different variations of, well, this comes after this and this.
Uh-huh.
I really, I still listen to albums, like, and when I say albums, from beginning to end. I think that the artists in any genre, whether it's classical or pop music or old rock or anything, that the album is kind of meant to be heard from beginning to end. And when you leave one piece and go to another piece, there should be some sort of a connection. And it was difficult to put it together, but one of the things we wanted to do was, since the album has so many I don't want to say abstract elements to it, although it does. We wanted to start with something that was a little bit accessible to anyone who would listen to the instrument and who listens to music. That we can say, okay, it's clearly in a key. We can hear the music, the melody, and all these, and then the virtuosity of it. And so we thought that that'd be a good opener, and then we
Yeah.
can kind of go off in different directions after that. So
It says I bassoon. I mean, really, that piece
yeah,
is like I bassoon.
yeah,
Here I am.
yeah, yeah.
Let's see. By the way, this is a little bit about lesser. I, I I guess I'm okay with lesser recordings of bassoons. Click clack 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 and clack clack clack. The metallics that you hear. Nothing. I have the note in bold. I don't hear clackings or other technical instrument sounds, and I presume that is quite exactly what you want. Just the purity of
Yes,
the sound.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
The bassoon is probably one of the loudest instruments. And when I say, I should rephrase that. It's actually a very soft instrument with the sound that comes out of it. But as far as the key noise and just the
Uh-huh.
mechanical things that you don't want in the sound, the bassoon is probably one of the worst instruments for that. And we take great care to try to silence that. And the maker of my instrument has done some special things to my instrument to help that.
And
I
tell
still
us, because there are bassoonists. Your instrument I can't quite remember at the moment. The brand of
a man named Bernd Mussmann, and he's out of Weiblingen, Germany, which is just outside of Stuttgart, and he's been making bassoons for decades. And he's not as well known in America as in Europe, but it's one of the finest instruments on the planet. And he does some things to the mechanics of the instrument on the outside of the instrument They're little extra things, of course, but he can put some things on the instrument that really help make it silent, and that way you can just hear the sounds of the instrument instead of all the key noise.
Yeah, and by the way, it's a little ironic that we're having this discussion about instrument noises because, of course, on this CD there are very deliberate noises.
Yes,
So, and we'll
it,
get there and we'll chat about them because I love them. I just love them, and I should know how they work, but I'm going to ask you how they work. Okay,
sure.
when we get there. Let's move on. I guess so. So, in other words, you got this wonderful Carnival of Venice piece
Thank you,
that
thank you.
gets people comfy and
It, and
hearing the
it's just
rain.
a fun piece to play, and and it has a lot of what I call the parlor tricks of the instrument. So
And
yeah,
one of my favorite composers, as I've mentioned, Vincent Persichetti. And now I'm going to do a few dates because I feel very strongly that it's important we all get a kind of handle on where they live, what they live, what all of that. So
sure,
we're
sure.
talking Persichetti, born in 1915, lived till 1987. So he really
Yes,
saw it all in many ways. Parable for solo bassoon, Opus 110. It was composed in 1969, which is interesting, I think, in terms of my memory of where his pieces come from. And it's as per your notes, I don't know this piece actually, and I love Persichetti. So, but you say Parable for solo bassoon that it's the fourth of 25 parables Persichetti
yes.
composed. And that really later, when and if and as I ever get some time, I'm going to have a look at that. I presume these other parables are maybe for other instruments or something like that.
They are for sometimes they're solo instruments, and there's actually a I forget which number it is, but there's a parable for band.
Maybe that's
And
why it has me so curious. I don't think I've
yeah,
ever conducted that one. I've conducted the divertimento, but well, anyway, and I want to do this, use this Persichetti quote because I find it really kind of fascinating, if a mind bender. Quote: "My parables are music, where I'm avoiding a truth in order to make a point." And
yes.
you go, huh? So it is. Well, you're going to talk about it too a little bit, but let me just throw a few things out that as I was listening to the introduction is kind of mysterious. I mean, he does set something big sound in your lower register. Wow, huge, wonderful sound. That's you as much as his writing. Very exciting, clean, huge sound, and so forth. Yeah, give us a little something from your experience of preparing this piece.
Well, I'll tell you, this is a piece that we often encounter as a study piece in college. A lot of students get it. I got it, and I tell you, I just did not like the piece at all. And it wasn't until later. There's a bassoonist. His name is Rod Ackman. He teaches at the University of Oklahoma. I just saw Rod about a week ago, and we talked a little bit. But he did this performance of this very piece at a conference that I'd gone to, and he just totally reimagined the way that the piece should go. And I thought this is the way this piece should be played. So now I'm inspired. So I pulled it out of my library and started playing a little bit, and it became one of my standard pieces that I take on the road, that I play in concerts. And it's when you listen to it and kind of conceive of it in a different way, it's really a fabulous piece of music. But it is one of these kind of mid 20th century philosophical pieces that, like you said, it's or like he quoted, it's you're trying to say something without saying anything, and that you're left with a question, or you're pondering the universe as you're going through this piece, and it's just such a great piece of music and so well crafted that he uses some very interesting. Not really any. I don't, to my knowledge, I'm trying to remember. There's not a lot of what we call extended techniques in the piece, but he's really reaching as a composer. You can tell, to try to get these sounds out of the instrument and sounds out of the air that may not have existed before. And so it's just a delightful piece to play. And I think,
I'm going to jump in
yeah,
before I forget because I
yeah,
forgot something that I was going to say, and it's back. I'd better catch it. I'm getting old. But the way you described this revelation of discovering someone who finally, and it's so true, is it not? Someone finally makes makes it understands a piece, and suddenly it all clicks for everybody. And
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm thinking, especially in contemporary repertoire,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a particular piano piece by a colleague of mine, friend of mine, and it just made no sense to me at all, or to pay, basically to anybody else. And then one pianist in Texas, I think, somewhere, um, at Houston, I think. Anyway, I've forgotten his name, of course, but uh, finally understood, and all of a sudden it was Mozart.
Yeah,
All of a sudden
exactly,
everything made
exactly. And I
sense.
think music is beautiful in that way, where because I had played it as a student, I had listened to many recordings of it. There's some very fine recordings out there, and I had listened to many performances of it, but I just didn't like the piece. And when you hear somebody that has their interpretation that kind of it does something to you, and you're like, that's so I want to now take that interpretation and use it as a base to make my own interpretation now.
Mhm.
It's all the same notes still, it's all the same everything, but you're really changing the piece and I see bringing it to life.
Well, and that's
So
the mystery, really. I think I mentioned intuitive at some point earlier, and
yeah,
that is the mystery. It's all chicken scratch on a page,
yeah,
and then it may become a little more like notes and bars and dumb stuff like that. And then if one is lucky, all of a sudden, and if the piece is good, all of a
yeah,
sudden there are revelations.
exactly,
I'm so glad
exactly,
we touched on that, because it's so important in our profession. Things
yeah,
can stare right back at us with the answers. I'm thinking of when I was a kid, the symphonies of Bernstein.
yeah,
They were like, Stravinsky or something when I was 15. I could not hear it. I just couldn't make head nor tails out of it. And of course, as we hear things more and more, and as we mature,
yes,
but to me, again, those Bernstein symphonies are Mozartian. They're so gorgeous. Okay,
yeah,
Alexandra Uzanov, 1955. So a young man still, if I may say so, from my from my vantage. The piece is called Lawson, for bassoon solo, written in 2015, and it refers. Should I should I spoil it, or do you want to get us into? Nah, I'll spoil it. I was puzzled. I thought, okay, Alexander Uzanov, okay, Lawson for bassoon. What? Fred Lawson, Jeffrey Lawson,
yeah.
Annette.
Who's this
Uh,
Lawson person?
and then, of course, in your program notes, it's referring to the Lawson cypress
Yeah.
tree in Oregon. And by the way, my side point and doing my little, searching around, apparently it is also in decline because of cypress rot. So it's
Oh
another
wow.
kind of like so many of our American trees that just die. I think the American cherry or something died out. But so when I got that piece of information, I'm going to get myself in trouble here. So you can bail me out. I thought, oh, okay, I've got it. And then my mind and my imagination said, okay, cypress tree, nothing. Now it's your turn.
Yeah.
Explain the piece to me, please.
Well, this is I think Uzunov. It's nice that you wanted to talk about Persichetti first, because Uzunov is taking. It's like he's taking what Persichetti did and going beyond. And of course he's in a much more French tradition. Working in France, and it's this idea of sound and how he can take these kind of what we call 20th century techniques, some of the loud sounds and the non melodic sounds and non pitch sounds and such, and combine them with real pitches to create this palette of sound that is not necessarily melodic, although there is a rhythmic motive that goes throughout the
Mm-hmm.
piece, and it just kind of you sit back and let the sound come over you, and if I play it right, you can really hear what he's trying to say. And it's such a like if we go in and we listen for the melody, we're just not listening for we're not approaching the piece in the right way. And that's what so many of these great 20th century composers did to kind of open up that window. And now in the 21st century, composers are saying, okay, maybe there's a nice little long note here that might have been a melody at some point, but now I'm going to interfere with some other material and kind of present this new palette of sound. And his music is just such a beautiful sense. There's another composer, I'm going to forget, a French composer. I'll remember it in just a moment. Who's kind of writing in the same vein right now? I'll remember in just a moment.
It'll
But
come.
anyway, but Alexander, he's and so this loss in Cyprus, this idea of a very strong tree, and
I looked it up. I looked up the tree.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's kind of funny because bassoons are made out of maple, and I thought, okay,
Oh,
but here's this loss in Cyprus, and it's just such a cool. Oh, I'll tell you a little story about the piece. We were doing a festival together, and you were going to ask about the Talos Festival. Um, we He was our guest composer at the Talos Festival.
where is that, by the way? Where is this festival
Well,
held?
we were in the Swiss Alps, and now we've moved to Sarajevo in Bosnia.
My
And the
favorite
pandemic
city,
has
by
kind
the
of
way.
turned us upside down.
That's my favorite city,
Excuse
Sarajevo.
me, I'm sorry.
That is my favorite city, Sarajevo.
Sarajevo.
I have
Yeah,
friends that live there.
beautiful.
It's a beautiful city. It's a big city, big enough,
Yeah,
and yet
yeah.
nobody even gives a second thought to Sarajevo. So it just sits there in its
Well,
own
yeah.
little delicious.
I think
Yeah.
a lot of people, refer back to the war in the '90s, and they,
Mm.
it's still you can still see ravages of the war, but it's a thriving city, and or at least it was the last time we went. I'm very scared to see when we go back, how it survived the pandemic.
It's
But
survived
anyway,
well. I
so
speak to a friend there every single week.
oh,
It's
wonderful.
doing just fine. Sarajevo's doing just fine.
Good, good, good. Well, when we were
Anyway,
still in Switzerland, we were sitting down at a breakfast, and you intermingle at these festivals and such. And I had mentioned that I was contemplating doing a CD over on unaccompanied bassoon music, and he said, "Oh, hold on just a moment," and he ran off. And I thought, whoa, you know, maybe he didn't like what I said. I've offended him, or maybe he had to run to the bathroom or something. I thought, oh my gosh, is he okay? And so, like 5 minutes later, he comes back downstairs. He had run upstairs to his room, and he says, "Here, I want you to have this." And he gave this piece to me,
mm,
and I thought, well, this is wonderful. And most of the time, I have to live with pieces a little bit to really
yeah.
understand them, and all of these pieces that were on the CD were pieces that I had I'd played them many times, and they were kind of near and dear to me. Um, but this piece was the kind of the newest one that was on the album, and I went back to my practice room and I played through the piece that morning, and it was one of these instant things. I mean, I could only get through maybe, bits and pieces of it because it's very technically challenging, but you could still hear the ideas that he had. I thought, oh, once I get to where I can play this thing, it's going to be a great piece of music. And so I went ahead and committed to it right then. And
And by the way, it is what it's a perfect example of what we kind of alluded to a few minutes ago. It's chock a block with special effects. Yeah.
yes,
Uh, uh, Sound bending, all those special, wonderful bassoon effects that are not just superficial. This piece in particular really gives us some meat here in terms of, I
well,
don't know, some kind of
yeah,
go.
and that's what I really, really, really like about his writing is that he takes these kind of effects that the bassoon can do, and there are so many composers that just kind of use them as well as an effect,
Yeah, exactly.
and it's almost like they don't really fit the music, but here's something that the bassoon can do. Um, but he takes them very seriously, and he doesn't use them just because he can use them. It's
Mhm.
like that sound is he conceives of that sound as part of the composition, and it really I think it's just a fabulous use of where 20 like I said, contemporary composers now are taking these discovered things that 20th century composers were kind of playing around with, and now he's really kind of making music
Yeah.
out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very well put, actually, if I may say so. The idea that we discovered them, shall we say, 30, 40 years ago, 50, 60 years
Yeah.
ago, even some of these ago. And now, we can have a generation of composers that are saying essentially, wait a minute, let me see here. What
Yeah.
does that really,
Exactly.
what
Yeah.
does that really do? How can I really use that to express an idea as opposed to just, well, let's show them another little circus act.
I want to interrupt you for just a moment
Sure.
because it just popped into my head.
Yeah.
Philippe Hersant.
Herson?
Hersant. Philippe Hersant. He's another French composer who's just at that edge of, you know, really writing beautiful music that incorporates these contemporary sounds, but not just in a trivial way. They're really part of this sound palette that contemporary composers are using, where it's just beautiful music. It's not it. Sometimes the sounds can be a little bit jarring, but they're used in such a way that in the form of the piece they fit perfectly.
Yeah,
So
and also jarring is good. I mean, come on. Bad news is good. Good news is,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, the world is the world. The good, the bad, and the ugly. But before we kind of move into Wilson Osborne's piece, Rhapsody for Solo Bassoon, I just want to, because it's odd that you mentioned it a few minutes ago, and I usually always ask the question, and then I thought to myself over time, well, maybe it's just too dumb a question. But in my view, and my experience with people, that putting together a CD is a big deal. Period. In
sure, yeah,
at so many levels, even getting them funding, on and on and on. But making those choices is
yeah.
in can be a nightmare. Remember, we touched on it just a few minutes ago. What? I mean, can you give me an idea? Was there a stack over here and then a stack over here, and 6 months later?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what I was thinking.
it was almost kind of a process of elimination where there were so many pieces I wanted to put on the album that didn't make it.
Mm-hmm.
But the real kicker that kind of made why I put these on the CD is they were pieces I didn't want to put anything on the CD that I thought had been over recorded. If there are some fabulous recordings out there, there's no reason for me to just redo it. And so I looked at pieces, and especially in like the Persichetti and the Osborne, where the last really great recordings may have been like 30 years ago. There's a wonderful recording of the Persichetti, I believe by Sol Schoenbach, and it's just outdated technology. I mean, we can still go back and listen to the record, but like the miking of the bassoon, it really brings the piece. It's a different type of piece now. So that's one of the reasons the standard pieces that are on the album are there for that reason. That you know I thought they needed a kind of a new contemporary recording now that our recording technology is so much better. And then there are a few pieces that were written for me that I felt like these composers need to be out there a little bit more. And then there were a couple of there's one or two pieces that people wanted to see on the CD. I got down to the last piece, and
Oh, you gotta grovel now and again.
well, I put out a little poll, and I said I'm creating this album, and I have room for one more piece, and I asked people what they wanted, and that's how the Libby Larsen, the jazz variations was put on. Um,
You weren't particularly thinking of that piece at the time, and somebody, or what?
No, in fact, I didn't really. I had never played it. I didn't know of it, and I had all these people telling me, say, this piece really needs to be recorded and put out there. And
By the way, that's what drew me to you, Libby Larsen. Yep.
wonderful,
Not the
wonderful.
piece. I had never heard the piece before, but
Yeah, I
I'm
hadn't
trying
either.
to think of the piece
Yeah,
that I did work with. It's something about ponds and fog or something. I can't remember
yeah,
of
yeah,
hers that was such magical imagery. It
yeah.
was an orchestral piece, I
Well,
think.
she also wrote a concert piece for bassoon and piano that I have played before, and just fabulous music, wonderful piece. And so
So
when
that
people
got me.
were,
That's the one that got me. That I saw
yeah,
Libby Larsen, and I went, I'm okay. I'm going to chase this guy.
wonderful,
And let's get kind of go back a couple of pages because I don't want to miss Antonio Lauro.
yes,
Again, 1917 to 1986. Those people that lived through that wonderful whatever the variety of ages and music and everything else are so fascinating. Anyway, okay. So Antonio Lauro. The piece is called Lauro for solo bassoon, and I went what? Just as I did in the other one. But now we're talking very, very interesting like Enigma variations or something. And
Yes.
here's the reason. And then you get to talk about it. The movements: Tatiana, Andreina, Natalia. And these are character studies of women that the composer has known, and so on. Okay, go ahead. Give us more. This is
Well,
a wonderful piece. I really
yeah.
like it.
So there's a little bit of a history behind this one as well, where and just like the Persichetti, this was introduced to me by a performance, and I'll never forget this. It was at the same conference, just at a different year, and the bassoonist Monica Ellis, who is the bassoonist for the Imani Winds out of New York. She came out and she played this piece, and I just instantly fell in love with it. I thought, wow, this is a fabulous piece of music. So I ordered it and I played it a few times, and I've given it to some of my students, and I've played it quite a bit. It's a hard piece of music, but I found out that Antonio Lauro, he was a guitarist,
Yeah, I
and just
looked
a
that straight up. Yeah.
yeah, and when you say the name around guitar people, they're like, of course, and Lauro, of course, he's like one of the guitar gods, and very famous composer out of Venezuela that just his folk music was just very highly regarded. And it was kind of funny as I was recording this album. My office was a couple of doors down from a guitar professor, and I could hear his students practicing the same pieces that I was playing. And I know that they are difficult on the guitar too, but man, they are really hard on the bassoon.
And again, credit to the arranger Paquito de Rivera.
Yes, yes, yes. He was smart enough to grab this wonderful composer and transcribe these guitar pieces for bassoon, and they just work great. They're wonderful
And
pieces.
looking at a couple of mine just notes, which is my way of trying to get people to really understand these picture studies, these character studies of people.
Yes.
Let's see, Tatiana, for example, lovely. Oh, she must be a romantic. I have in my notes based on what I'm hearing. It's fluid, expressive, boundlessly
Yes.
melodramatic, and so on. Adriana, I hope I'm pronouncing properly. Busy, active sort of personality. You see
Yeah.
what I mean?
One of them was his daughter, I think, and
Yeah.
one of them was like his daughter-in-law, but these are all. You would think when you listen to these might be love interests, but actually I think they were members of his
I think you're
family.
right.
Just
Yeah, I
because
seem to
there's
remember.
one that might be like a love of his girlfriend or wife perhaps,
Yes.
but the
Who
rest of
might
them
it
are
be?
just
Do you
they're just
remember?
family members.
Do you
And
remember? Because
I
I have
I do not.
well, I have for Natalia. For
Ah,
Natalia, let's
yes,
say she might be a suspect because I'm in my impression of the pieces. Let's see, seductive tune, coquettish, a
yes, yes,
dense like tune. She's a personality now, middle, so on and so forth. And then there are just this El Marabino, the place where serpents abound, is what I
yes,
found. I
yeah,
mean, whatever that is, but I love it, and it's also so Latino,
yes,
serpents,
yes,
Mayan, all that stuff. So the Antonio Lauro's piece is just so imaginative. It's just such an
absolutely.
imaginative piece. And
But
whatever that is, like four movements, something like that.
yes, I think
Five,
four.
five, I guess.
Yeah, there are. I've got the CD. Yeah, there are
Five, yeah.
five different songs. And what I found as I was preparing them is, they sound so interesting and exotic, as you said, but really they're just basically they're Bach. They use this counterpoint
Yeah,
that
yeah,
Bach
yeah,
wrote in his solo like his solo suites and his solo partitas. It's the same type of writing, just in a little bit different scale, different style, and it's just amazing. It
Which, by the
really
way,
makes me appreciate the genius of Lauro. So
you took the words right out of my mouth because these things aren't accidents.
yeah,
They're not accidents. He clearly knows what he's doing. And as I said,
exactly.
character portraits, that can't be easy, especially on,
Nope.
even though it's a transcription on solo bassoon. I mean, come on.
Yeah,
But anyway, so that one I triple starred or something. Okay, let's have a look at Wilson Osborne, 1906 to 1979. This Rhapsody for solo bassoon. Do I assume this is probably a fairly well known piece in the profession, or? What?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is another one of those pieces like the Persichetti that is there are many great recordings of it, but many of them are outdated.
Yeah.
In other words, the recording technology, the greatest recordings were 30 years ago. And so I had looked around and tried to pick out pieces that were needed an update. And so, I mean,
And
and
by
I
the way, about that recording technology, forgive me for interrupting again. It's that the word came to my head as you were saying this, because imagining what we all know and remember about then and now, which is flat. What I'm trying to
yeah,
say is that the technology wasn't their fault, but it was just flat by comparison to what I hear on the CD, for example, in terms of the colors
exactly.
and all of that stuff.
Yeah,
So very good
and
idea to re-record.
it's especially true of not just the bassoon, but also the oboe, where our sound is we have a very very dry sound, and in a hall we can make the instrument sing, but in a recording studio it sounds very flat, and not necessarily flat in pitch, but like you said, just dead.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
dead sound,
yeah.
and
Very
it
tricky.
really makes me appreciate some of the older recordings because those guys still sounded so good, and the technology was just not ready for the instruments yet. And
Mhm.
now we're getting recordings out where, wow, that sounds like a real bassoon. That sounds like a live, uh, you know, performance instead
And
of,
also electronic
you know,
recording engineers who now know
yes, exactly,
our side of the profession, as
yes,
opposed
yes,
to,
yeah,
I don't want to be rude to anybody, but as opposed to, I can remember times when we would go in for a recording session and what we had were rock and roll guys at the time.
yeah,
They didn't have a
exactly,
clue, and not a clue.
exactly,
Anyway,
exactly.
no offense, everybody.
Yeah,
There's
but the
still other.
Osborne, yes, a funny note there with the Osborne. There's so you said you used to play clarinet, and clarinetists, it's the one piece in our repertoire as bassoonists that other instruments have stolen,
Oh, really?
and
Interesting.
clarinetists play it all the time.
Oh.
And in fact, you know, the rumor goes around that it's so popular in the clarinet world that a lot of them think that we stole it.
And as
So
you can tell, I dropped out of clarinet way
yeah,
back.
yeah, yeah,
I had
yeah,
no idea that there is I guess a transcription for clarinet that's very
yeah,
popular. Okay, I'm ready for Libby Larson now. Jazz variations for solo bassoon, and let me just speak and then for a second, because
sure,
based on our conversation even so far, maybe that's why I'm so in love with Libby Larson's music. I mean her art, her
yes,
skills, her genius. Um, is that it says jazz variations for solo bassoon, and it's so subtle. Do you
yes,
see what I'm trying to get at? It took me a long time to go, oh, okay, yes, I see. It's so
yeah.
sophisticated, the jazz references, which makes my admiration for her go even higher. But it's just an amazing piece. Again, how does this fit? Do lots of bassoonists play this in their repertoire, or
Well,
or what?
you might say that this is becoming a new standard in our repertoire because it wasn't really, and I forget the year that it was written, but
I was looking for it too, and I don't see it either.
uh,
So
yeah, I'm
doesn't
trying
matter,
to
but
see, yeah, but it's a piece that I didn't know of growing up, you know, when I was learning the instrument and all the standard repertoire. And I'm pretty sure it was written after that, like in the maybe 90s, maybe even early 2000s.
yeah,
But
just
so many
trying to look.
people, it's a very accessible piece, and so it's quickly, like I said, becoming one of our standards. A lot of people are playing it now, and to my knowledge, this is the first recording of it. Yes, yeah, it's because
Ah,
when I was reaching out to Libby to get the permissions and everything. This is the first CD recording of it. So,
mhm.
um,
Congrats.
yeah, it's a and the only thing that I wish was different about the piece is the title. It says Jazz Variations, and I think if she would have changed it a little bit and said Variations on Jazz, it might be a little bit different because it's not jazz at all, but it's kind of jazz inspired, and it has these variations that hint at what jazz is to her, you know. And
Uh-huh,
she was writing that when she wrote this piece, she was heavily invested in learning about John Coltrane, and she was listening to a lot of John Coltrane. And I tried my hardest to hear John Coltrane in this piece, and I just couldn't do it. I don't think it's there. But then I started understanding. I said, no, this isn't supposed to be that. It's supposed to be okay. I'm listening to a lot of John Coltrane, and it's doing this to me. Here are my reflections on that. You're not trying to copy it, not
Very
trying to copy the style or anything like that, but to just kind of write these variations that remind me of what jazz is.
in some very subtle sub basement way, which
Exactly.
is her music altogether. It's all sub basement as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly. There's
Which is why I'm
there's a
so fascinated by it.
there's a variation in there that I like to call the the song. I'm blanking here for a second. The spiritual.
Oh,
That's it's like jazz has this rich history and such. And there's a variation that I like to call the spiritual, in that it's a slower one, of course, and you can just hear this woman singing in church, and
oh,
it's that kind of jazz
I
that
said, and we are now speaking about the joyous necessity to
yes,
listen to pieces more than once. You know what I'm saying? In other words,
yeah,
it is
absolutely, yeah,
it's like me and the Bernstein symphonies. It took me a lot of
yeah,
listenings before I finally heard tunes, if you will, as a kid. Um, Let me just throw a couple of things here to give you my sort of impressions, and then once again, it's this whole thing about going back and listening again to pick up even more juicy bits, and that's why I like Libby Larsen. Again, I wish I could remember this piece, but we're talking a pond, in the deep south or something at sunrise, and it's just vivid in
yeah,
ways that I can't begin to explain. Likewise here, even, and also the sophistication as we've had about her touching on jazz and stuff. If you get my drift, that didn't sound quite right.
yeah,
Or Coltrane. And also the other thing is, I now realize I'm a real stick in the mud. I'm getting better at my old age, but when I was, white tie and tailcoat, I mean, I never would have crossed my mind to listen to John Coltrane. Period.
yeah,
You know what I'm trying to say. Now, luckily, I've matured, and I now have a much wider taste palette and appreciation. But it's so interesting because I think,
yeah,
Libby Larsen, what? You spent
yeah.
time listening to John Coltrane? What's wrong with you, Libby? And of course, there's so much good stuff in all music.
I
I
think
think
that's
I got
what's so exciting about today's new composers, or
yeah,
young composers, I guess, is
yeah,
you've got this whole generation of composers now that, yes, they're classically trained, but they were also listening to jazz and to rock and to
yeah,
all these different things, and it's infusing their music.
yeah.
There's
In a very good way. In a very,
one
very
of my
good way.
one of my favorite composers is actually not on the CD. I've recorded some other stuff with him on some other albums, but his name is Sonny Nabel, and he's a native Californian, but he lives in New York now. And his music is just this eclectic mix of all these different styles. And we've talked a lot about what is the current state of music and where are we, and this sense of eclecticism that we have today. That's the new style. That's what when we look back 100 years from now, we may say this is the eclectic era or something, where
This is Gunther
composers are
Schuller.
writing, yeah, they're writing
This
very
is that.
serious
Remember
music.
Gunther Schuller and his idea that jazz inevitably would become part, that these forms
Yes,
would inevitably mix and become one. And I remember thinking when I was young and a snot, I was thinking, no, please don't sully it. Come on now, don't do that. Now, of course, I understand.
yeah,
So, well, this is a beautiful example of just that whole idea of the mixing now of composers, as you said, and you encounter young composers.
yeah,
It
yeah.
drives me crazy that they
But it's
start in rock and roll and then
yeah.
suddenly they're writing symphonies. What?
What's really cool about it is it's it's not classical music that sounds jazzy, or it's not jazz music that sounds classical. Because those are those I tend to not like those types of pieces.
Thank you.
Um, it's like a true art music that has it's borrowing from everything. It's borrowing from jazz, it's borrowing from rock, it's borrowing from the classical tradition, and it's just
And by the way,
it's
Europe is from I review CDs from a lot of CDs from Europe, and European pianists, they're all jazz improvisers.
Yes.
The young
Yes.
ones, they're all and it drives me crazy. And then they'll play a prelude or something.
Yeah.
Okay, I see that we're pushing, and let me just be clear. You and I know that people listen to 3 or 4 minutes of a video
Sure.
interview. Yeah, so we don't care. That's
Yeah.
my new philosophy post COVID, which is I don't care. I just want to have the conversation. If they want to listen, they can. If they want to listen to just a bit, not. But I think I'm going to try and push us a little
Sure.
bit
Sure.
faster
Sure.
because I'm pushing an hour, which would even push your patience, wouldn't it? But Russell Brown, born in 1976.
Yeah.
I do want to stop there for a second. Kyrie for bassoon and electronics, composed in 2006. And why did I put all the stars after it? Well, I guess because it has this wonderful melding, this conflation of electronics and bassoon, pitch slides, all that good stuff. You want to kind of can be played with electronic tape and I think that's a question for you. Can this be played with electronic tape and with a live bassoonist, or is it a finished piece? Does that make any sense?
Oh no, the original conception of the piece is to be played live.
Okay, good.
And
Yeah.
and I've performed it many times live, where you have an amplified sound, that you run the computer file through. So it's not interactive in that it's a set like an MP3 file, and you just play along with it, So
Just
we
wanted to
call
make
it
I
bassooning
suspected that
tape back in the 80s. But it's I usually don't care for these types of pieces. When I hear them in concert, when I hear them, it's nobody ever really gets the mix right. But this piece, it's just it's like you're not really supposed to tell what is bassoon and what is electronic, and he just takes it and weaves it in and out. And sometimes when I'm listening, if it's been a few years or a few months, I should say, from listening, I'll kind of forget and say, wait, is that a bassoon or is that is that the electronics?
Wow,
So
congrats. I mean, he pulled that one off successfully then.
yeah.
But there's more to it. I think in that I hear imagery,
Yes.
I see imagery. Wonderful melting, as I mentioned. I think there's conflation of electronics and bassoon. But let me get down here a little bit more. I heard basically I see here that I found it very appealing.
Yeah.
And it's meditative. It has there's a section that to me is, I love the word atavistic. I just was taken back to prehistoric human beings or something.
Yeah.
But all that magic, distant. I even heard a little bit of a Moorish, if you will,
Yeah.
pentatonic something or other in there, which to me is called imagery. Something atavistic imagery. In terms of history and locale, it's magical.
Yeah. It's a great piece.
Times and places. I mean, there you go. So that's a beauty. George Pearl, 1915-2009, Three Inventions for Solo Bassoon, from 1962. 62. So it's right there in the thick of his whatever that period was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Give me a little overview of this series of inventions.
This was one of the first pieces that I was introduced to that has, really this kind of 20th century style, and it's got a couple of multiphonics in it where you do some interesting things. There's a note that's kind of out of the range of the bassoon that you have to play, a high G, and he's really stretching the boundaries of the bassoon at that time, especially 1960.
And of public patience.
Yes.
I mean, those. I remember now these buzzings and kind of nuisance sounds. It's all very 1962.
Yeah. But it's a real treat, and it's another one of the pieces that has it does have some really great recordings out there, but none that are terribly recent. And there's a wonderful recording by, I think, Art Grossman, and that was done in the 70s or maybe 80s, and we needed a recording that has, again, just better technology. So
And I wanted to just mention, hang on, because I don't want to misidentify this piece. Is it Russell Brown? The Russell Brown piece. I just want to go back for a second. Hang on. Oh, tell me I've got my notes right. What I want to say, because I sent you a funny little cartoon about Dukas and the
Oh,
Sorcerer's Apprentice. I believe it's in the Russell Brown piece toward the end where there is some kind. Is it the Russell Brown piece? Help. But have you, in your studying of these works, had any moments that were sort of vaguely reminiscent? You know what I mean, of that little tune?
oh, I think you might be thinking of the Pearl. Yes,
Oh,
the
it is. Oh,
yeah.
hang on. Yeah, I'm one too low. It's no, it's Wilson Us. No, it's Lib. Hang on. I'll get my act together here. I promise, because I really want to get to the bottom of it. Because I just saw it a minute ago. Anyway, yeah, you thought it was the Pearl, maybe?
The
Where I made
third
that.
the third invention of the Pearl, it just has this incessant
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that might remind you of the Dukas, the Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Well, that'll do. I don't see that particular invention. I see you mentioned three in there, but I'll send you an email later. But because I'm so curious, because
Sure, sure.
composers toy with your head. Let's be clear.
Oh
In
yes.
terms in terms
Well,
of little bits.
there is something, and I won't tell you because it gives it away too easy, you know. But there is something embedded in the Kyrie,
Uh-oh.
and you have to be a fan of rock and roll, like, well, not even rock, but heavy metal music.
That's why it
You have
went
to
over
be
my head.
yeah. And
Probably.
there's a quote in Kyrie from it's from the group Black Sabbath. And
Amazing.
what's
Amazing.
interesting about it is that Black Sabbath actually used a medieval chant as the basis for their piece. So it's kind of, is he quoting the chant or is he quoting Black Sabbath? But it's in there, and
Love it. Love it. Love
I hadn't heard it until he told me. Russell Brown, he
it.
told me, he said, "You know what that is, don't you?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, now I can't unhear it."
Yeah, and again, as per my remarks, composers, you
Yeah.
know, they keep their mouths shut.
Yes.
Really, basically, they keep their mouths shut and let humankind figure out what they're up to.
Yes.
Something. Sorry about the car going by.
Oh no.
Let's see. What are we? What are we? I think I'm just. I think do need to run it down a little bit, but I think where I'm looking at toward the end here, the last couple three pieces. Give me. Do we?
Oh,
Um,
Schultz. We're on Schultz now.
I had Schultz, but I'm trying to figure out whether we should. That's a beauty, though. Let's do Schultz. What the hell? Who cares? Go.
Yeah.
Fibonacci,
Yes.
I think. And that was the great mathematician from Pisa.
Yes. Exactly.
So there is a story within a story within a, et cetera. So right away, I'm intrigued. And then there's something, this golden mean thing, 58
Yes.
is from what I've been reading. Anyway, and then the haiku,
Yes.
which
Yes.
I will read one of them. Go ahead, give me an overview of Werner Schultz, born in 1952, so a contemporary, I presume, German composer, yet and this piece that somehow is involving this famous
Yes.
mathematician.
Yeah. Schultz is he's in Austria, and he was introduced to me actually by the maker of my instrument, the Bernd Mussmann. And as I talked to him a little bit, he gave me some music. He said, "Here, play this, see what you think." And he gave me these haikus, and they're just gorgeous. The idea that he is a mathematician, and he knows all of his music it's kind of based mathematically, and yet it doesn't sound like, it's not like it sounds like Milton Babbitt. It's very melodic and very kind of it's very crafty in the way that he uses math and science to create his music, and yet it still sounds like it just kind of evolves from the heart, you know. And which one is your favorite haiku?
Well, let me read. I'm not quite sure, but the one that, based on what you were just saying, I'll read this haiku. Many times I looked up at the stars and asked, "Who covers the sleeping moon with a shadow?" And my brain goes pop, slam. My brain matter is drooling out my. Yeah, I mean, it's like typical haiku. It's like what? But the first one is also fun. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble seeing. Flooded with wind, the rainbow bows down to the trembling water, a kiss of the sky. Ah,
Yeah, yeah.
ah.
Just
So
amazing. And listeners to the show might say, well, these are not haikus. You've got the form all wrong. But it is a true haiku. It's just been translated. And so the
I
translation,
see.
I forget what he speaks like 13 different languages too. And so I forget
I
exactly
hate
which
that.
was the original language that he wrote the haiku, but then when it
Ah,
gets translated, that's the English. So yeah, it
I
doesn't
see.
follow the 575 rhyme scheme.
And of course, I'm a moron, but because I could have sworn I was reading haiku. But I see, I get the drift. In terms of this English language
Yes,
translation,
exactly.
the punchline, the
Yeah.
haiku part, the last couple three words, are still very clever, even in an
Yes.
English language
Yeah. But
translation. Let me
it's
do
it.
one more.
Oh,
A ray of light warms the soul, watching over the beginning and tames the restlessness of sound, striving on. So basically, striving on might perhaps be haiku-ish, but poem in this English translation doesn't quite fit the pattern. And who cares? Because the world is
I,
diverse. What can I say?
yeah, yeah. I think it's
Okay.
the idea of the miniature. He's got
Yeah,
these are
exactly right.
all miniatures,
Yeah,
and the
they
music
are.
is the same. I mean, I think one of the movements is 30 seconds.
Yeah, and I'm looking at in my notes here. For example, the smallest spring brook. It's busier than the others. It's brief, and then it's done.
Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
exactly.
Now this is a huge piece. It's the last one. I'm looking at Chris Errol's born in 1970, Blur for solo bassoon. This is you got this guy on this one. You commissioned this piece from him in 2006, and here's my first word in my notes. Wow! Exclamation point. Interesting. The opening is kind of like a buzzing bee on LSD. Sorry,
Yes.
and so forth. Come on, give us an overview because it's just chock a block with imagery and
Sure,
wonderful
sure.
stuff.
This is probably the most difficult. Well, it is the most difficult piece on the whole album, and this kind of served as the impetus for creating an album of all unaccompanied music. So it's funny that I put it last, but when you listen to it, the way that it plays out, it's really you can't really put anything after it. And I even had the sound engineer add about 20 seconds of silence at the end so that your CD just doesn't stop or go on to something else, because it really warrants silence at the end. But it's one of the first pieces that I actively commissioned, and I I met with the composer and we talked a little bit about it, and he said, "Well, here's this idea. Here's what I'm going to give to you." And I said, "Okay, great." And then when he delivered it, I had a very short time to do the premiere, and I was in the practice room 3 or 4 hours a day just trying to work on this piece because it's so hard. But what he does is it's kind of the way I like to describe it to audiences when I play it. It's almost like a reverse theme and variations, where usually when you do theme and variations, you get this nice simple theme, and then it gets more complex as you go. And what Chris does is he throws this wall of sound at you from the very beginning, and it's supposed to emulate just a blur of sound. And when I've asked him about it, he even says even if you miss a few notes, or if you have to play it so fast that it just blurs together. And then it's written with each little variation. I guess it's not really a variation in that what he's doing is he's taking the same material and repeating it, and then he's removing things as it
That's what
goes.
I'm glad you're going to do that. I have this note to ask you about this reductive process.
Yes,
Reductive process.
exactly. Yeah.
Removing pitch and duration. I
Yes.
mean, it's talk about mathematics. This sounds
Yes.
very formulaic. Also, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't interrupt you, but yeah,
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. So he does that, I think, 6 different times, and then there are these 3 interludes that come in between. But he repeats it, but when he takes things out, he replaces them with, instead, like if he takes, let's say, a pitch, he takes an eighth note A out, he'll replace that with like a key click or a slap or something.
That's it. Aha!
And
Classic.
that's where you hear that's the trouble with having a silent instrument is because now I have to figure out how to make those sounds. um,
And
and
by the way, there's nothing like the sound of a pad slamming on, on
yeah,
clarinet and or bassoon. There's just something about that sound that just, goes right to the core of one's
yeah.
soul.
So by the time you get to the last variation, what you're left with is his own variation of a theme on Bach. So it's a Bach D minor theme that he's kind of reworked a little bit. And in between everything is all of this madness of sounds that you're just kind of smacking
Echoes,
the
pitch
instrument.
slides, inhales and exhales. Are
Yes,
those
yes,
are physical inhales and exhalations, yeah.
yes,
Right?
yes,
Uh-huh.
yes,
Amazing stuff. Nightmarish for sure.
yes,
Pagan, atavistic, my favorite
yes,
word. It's in a middle kind of high register of the instrument, which is interesting. How badly in trouble am I there?
yeah.
This is, I guess, I'm looking toward the end of the piece. I love the slapping pads effects and all that. Sounds like a calling out for help from an animal or something. You see what I mean? I mean, it's like your imagination just can go in a million different directions, and it's moving. It's
Yes,
really a moving piece and triggers some kind of empathy.
yes.
Those are mine.
It's one of these. It's one of the pieces where when I play it, I have a very strong emotional reaction to it, and that's what I really tried as hard as I could to get that on the album, and and then also when I play it live. But every time I play it, I have to be silent for about
Hmm.
a few seconds, just before. It's also a very physical piece, and it lasts a long time too. I think what is it, 16 minutes? I think.
Something.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the longest on the CD. Yeah, I thought I read 14. It doesn't matter, but it's a
yeah,
big
yeah.
chunk.
No, I
Big
think you're
chunk.
right. I think you're right. 14, but it's so physical and it just never stops. It just
Ah,
keeps on going. Um, like I should say my fingers never stop and the what I'm doing never stops. But by taking away the pitches, you're just kind of left with this blueprint at the end, and that's the Bach melody that was embedded the whole time from the
that
very first. So
and that, although I didn't recognize it as a Bach melody,
yeah.
I'll just speak the truth.
Well,
In that.
I should say inspired by a Bach
Okay,
melody. So
but still, I should I don't see in my notes that I recognize, except that there's somewhere in here where I mentioned a lovely, beautiful tune. So
yeah,
that tune fragment must be it. And on a second listening to something, I go, well, it's rather Bach-like.
yes.
Okay, well, we have at where are we? An hour and 12 minutes.
Okay, woo.
I think we've covered all the ground. All right, let me go back and just kind of give us a little finale to it all. It's been great fun chatting with bassoonist Scott Poole about your 2020 MSR Classics release, Alone, music for unaccompanied bassoon. And as I hope those who have lasted through our chat realize is that you have put together a really important CD solo bassoon repertoire, including pieces that bassoonists and others know, pieces that are, as you've mentioned, competition pieces. They're going to be good prep. It's a good recording for people preparing that kind of repertoire, and also new material. Have I pretty much followed that? I gotten that correct as an overview?
I believe so. I believe so. And if I can put one plug in
Sure.
for the reasoning behind this is that this will be the first in a series, and so my next project is to follow Alone. We have to be together.
Oh, marketing. Something you got some kind of marketing something or other going on. And can you give us a hint in
It'll be
order to be alone?
all duos.
Of course.
All duos. And one of the duos, as we were talking about way back at the beginning, one of the first things I'm going to put on the album is a duet for English horn and bassoon by Alan Hovhaness.
Bingo. And I don't know that piece. I'm sorry, Alan. Wonderful. And
Yeah.
we don't. It's kind of too late now, but you and I know that we both have a kind of relationship with Alan Hovhaness.
Yeah.
Scott Poole, many thanks. This has been been a hoot. I'm
Th-
glad we were able to get
Thank
it to
you
happen.
very much. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. Bye.